Okay. All right. So we're all here. So I want to thank Sean. We'll start out by thanking Sean for the wonderful opportunity to come together for this one last time. Again, this is a tribute to Rabbi Kelemer Zatzal and the Monday Night Halacha class that he led. And Sean, I'm going to basically let you lead on this. You're the person who decided to come around with this. So how do you want to go around?
No, well, I mean, I'll start with a little, and then obviously we'd love to hear from Mr. Pollack, from Bernie, from the guys who really were there for a long time. So I know, and it's funny, and I sent out an email about 5 years ago. I said to my wife, it was a Monday night, and most people sit at home at 9:00 at night, turn on the Monday Night Football game, or sit around saying they're going to do something and don't. And I said to my wife, I'm like, Rabbi Kelemer gives a shiur, and one day I'm going to look back, and my kids are going to ask me, you were around when Rabbi Kelemer was around? Did you go to every shiur he gave? And I said, I don't want to say to my kids, no, I was too lazy to go. And since this last week, I can't tell you, at least 3 people came over to me and said, I feel so bad. I never, ever went to the Monday night class. I always tried to go, and I always came up with an excuse, and I never went. And I know you went, and they were jealous of it.
And, I can do one better, which is predates all of this. I found out after I moved to West Hempstead that Rabbi Kelemer gave a shiur at Brandeis University in the late 70s and early 80s when I was there. I knew nothing about it. Had I known then what I knew then, boy, would I have participated in that. So that's one of my disappointments in life.
So I'm going to ask if anybody's not individually speaking at the time, keep yourself on mute, okay? So that way we don't get feedback.
So Elon, and I know the kids would as we all say, there's no stories that no one won't believe anymore. But we love going to class, and it was funny. He'd always speak about a halachic authority, but usually the first 20 minutes he spent embracing the rabbi he was talking about, and how much he loved him, and how great a gadol he was, and how sympathetic he was. So by the time we got to the halachic part, usually it was almost 9:30. And I remember I was at a wedding about a year ago, and I said to my wife, listen, we're only going to go for the chuppah anyway, and also the wedding's a Monday night, and I don't want to miss the rabbi's shiur. So I get to the wedding, and who's there? Of course, the rabbi's there, and he was Masada Kedushin. No, he wasn't Masada Kedushin, but he was at the wedding. And I said to the rabbi, aren't you giving the shiur tonight? I'm only staying for the chuppah because I'm going home for the shiur. He goes, of course I'm giving the shiur tonight. Why wouldn't I? I said, but you always stay for benching at a wedding. He goes, who says I'm not coming back? So the wedding was at Crest Hollow, and he got a ride, and he wasn't driving. It was only a year ago. He got a ride back to the shul, and then he took an Uber back to Crest Hollow to make sure he was there for Sheva Brachas. And I remember also him calling, and I know a bunch of us know, where he called our houses. I remember one day he called, and this is only, I think, the second time I went to the class, where this was the 3rd week, and my wife calls, and she goes, I said, who is it? She goes, it's Rabbi Kelemer, saying he felt bad. One of his kids showed up with their family on a Monday night for dinner and surprised him, and he wants to call all the regulars to make sure no one left their house yet and got to shul because he has to cancel the class last minute. So, and the class was an amazing idea. He really just wanted to show how the real gadols handled shilas. He didn't care about what the end was. He wanted to show you how sympathetic they were, to show you what the shilah was. And I think that really was, what everyone expected out of him. But really, I'd love to turn it over to the senior members to talk about the real beginning of the class. So I don't know if Mr. Pollack or Bernie, if one of you wants to take over.
Yeah. Lester, you want to?
Well, I wasn't there. I wasn't there at the very beginning, but what always struck me was that he had such a close association with so many gedolim over the years in different capacities in different places, and he somehow absorbed all the godless and was able to transmit it in such a plain, clear way that I remember I had one story that was had not to do with the class, but my first grandchild had his Shalom Zachor in his car. It was a Friday night, and it rained, and his car broke down in Queens, and he walked from Queens to West Hempstead, and he came directly to the Shalom Zachor. rather late, I'd say. But he didn't go home. He came first because he had a responsibility to show at the Shalom Zocha. So he came there. So I remember my son-in-law referred to him as a malach, which I think is a very apt way to put it. And there's just no way to express really how we feel about him. Just it's beyond words. Yeah.
I'd like to recall an anecdote again that involves Dr. Pollack. Maybe Lester, maybe you can fill in. Our son got married a girl from Silver Spring, so of course they married in the middle, which was in Baltimore. And Rabbi Kelemer was invited. I think he was Masader Kedushin. I can't imagine that he wasn't. I don't remember exactly. And the plan, if I remember correctly, Lester, you were going to drive to Baltimore and chauffeur the rabbi.
That never happened.
But the rabbi was very busy. Rabbi was always very busy. So what I remember, the scraps of your side of the story was that Lester continued to contact the rabbi and say, "It's getting late, Rabbi. We've got to get driving. It's a long ride." And the rabbi delayed until it crossed the borderline because when it would become impossible to make it. And Dr. Pollack came on his own. You drove by yourself, I believe. And Rabbi Kelemer flew. That was must have been 25 years ago. He was still 30 years ago. So he was still taking airplanes. And he landed at the airport in Baltimore. He looked around. He saw people dressed nicely who this is what we heard from the rabbi, people who looked like they were going to a wedding. So he approached them. And they said, "Sure, we're going to that wedding, hop in." And as a result, he arrived at the wedding early. And his comment to us was, "I've often wondered what takes place at a wedding on time. And here's my opportunity." Of course, Lester might have been looking forward to private time with the rabbi for several hours. That I guess that was a dream never to be realized.
That didn't happen.
So when did the rabbi stop flying?
That was his last flight, probably.
Get to think that might have been, it certainly was among his last flights. Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
And speaking of weddings, at my son's wedding, I still do not know the reason why, and the rabbi didn't want to tell me exactly why, but for some reason he felt the need to go into the room where my son and daughter-in-law were after and to be Adim together with Rabbi Pearl again. And I don't know what the issue was, what he was thinking of, but he wanted to be 100% sure that this was a kosher wedding. So he did something very unusual, and he would not reveal why, but there was one reason why he did this. But he certainly went the extra mile to make sure that everything was 100% kosher according to his standards.
Among the characteristics of the Monday night shiur that was called the Rabbi's Halacha shiur, and it seemed it was more derech halimud or derech hagdolim, darchei hagdolim, more than a Gemara shiur or more than a straight halacha shiur. And it always seemed to me that the charm of it was that it was somewhat intimate. Typically, it was a small group. I don't know how often it exceeded a dozen of us. And it was my opportunity to hear more of what might be the personal Torah of the rabbi. So that he would present it through the eyes of the Gedolim. And there was one series that involved Piskei Halacha of Rabbi Feinstein, earlier 20th century. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and Henkin, and Rav Henkin. And some controversy with respect to marital laws and Hilchos Kedushin and Gerushin, issues that threatened always to divide the Jewish nation, the Jewish people. And there were diverse opinions. And the rabbi would often present what seemed to be heterim. And once in my innocence, I said, "Rabbi, these heterim exist. and those Gedolim are no longer with us. It falls on you. And he said, well, I'm not up to it. He said they were real Gedolim. His modesty shone through, I think. They were real Gedolim, and they enjoyed breiter places, broad shoulders, and could assume the responsibility. He said, that can't happen. I can't do that, which I found somewhat disappointing, but also revealing. And it was through their voices that he expressed some of his fundamental, within our domain, more recently, he was dealing with an issue not long ago of Benosh Yisrael from the broader spectrum. And there was a case of a young girl who was a member, I think, of a conservative rabbinic family, if I'm not mistaken. And Shilas had come to, Ellen, do you remember? Shilas had come to the rabbi about whether people should participate in the simcha of the family. I don't want to even attempt details because I'll flub it. And something the rabbi taught us is that you have to be very careful when you repeat the leader's words, particularly his words. He says sometimes it comes back to him after only one or two bounces, and it's punkverkehrt. It's his halacha turned on its head. So in this case, the question came up about as to whether we can rely upon these persons as honest Jews. Do they have ne'amanis? And he said that terminology in our door has to be revisited. And what seems to have been referred to as persons who were categorized as Rishoim, and therefore Pasal Eidus, and in general, the Ne'amanos was not there. He said those terms have to be redefined. There's no such category in our lifetime of a Russia, somebody who could halachically be termed a Russia, and therefore categorically puzzled to any religious involvement. And I just thought that was an insight that he shared, and I very much appreciated hearing. We often pay tribute to Yachdus. We have to be one and unified and so forth. And here there was an expression of that in a broader scale, where the parentheses and embracing the group that we want to be Mishached was broadened.
Bernie, was that the shir where he talked about making regular people aid them? That he was, I thought, I don't want to, like you said, with misquoting. He talked about not making Rabbanim aid them and letting regular people be aid them. I remember he had a shir or two on that.
Yeah, I think that was somebody else, but yeah, they talked about even if someone doesn't keep Shabbos, as long as they sort of know that they don't, that you could trust them, and yeah, there was something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the shiurim based around that idea. I know he would always speak about Rabbi Lashev. Was Rabbi Lashev in the gift shop in JFK? He told that story a few times. Do you guys remember that one?
No, what was that story?
He would always tell about Rabbi Lashev came to America, and I think he said it was something that the Yehuda invited a few Rabbanim to go to JFK, but the big Rabbanim, not him, but they accidentally invited him because they thought it was the Yehuda of West Hempstead, not the Young Israel. And he said that I think Rabbi Lashev, he went into the duty-free shop, and people followed him in to see what does Rabbi Lashev need from the duty-free shop. And when he came out, they said, "What did you buy? What did you buy?" He said, "I have to bring a gift back for my wife." He said, "I was away from my wife, on this trip, and I have to bring a gift back." And he said, "That's why you follow the Gedolim, because you see things like that they do, not the halacha, but the way they live their life." And I know he told us that a few times, I think, that story in the Monday night shir.
Well, since you've opened women, I'm not a senior. I never include myself as senior. I'll say I'm middle-aged in the shir, middle-aged in general. Yasky one time, who's in the thing, one time said that I'm the rabbi's oldest Talmud when I first moved to West Hempstead. And I said, Yasky, this is an honor, but don't say oldest. But I think I was in the shir about 7 years or so. And I'm going to talk a little bit, also mention about the Gemara shir, which sort of stopped after he had the accident and morphed into it. And I think for all my fellow students, when I came, first of all, it took me a couple of years to get the nerve because I was the only woman. And it sort of came a couple of years to ask the rabbi if I could join, and he said, sure. But then when I came, I got the riot act. This isn't for personal questions. This isn't for asking questions. And they don't know that Baruch Hashem, I'm privileged to have been able to have personal contact with the rabbi, but there was a way to behave in the shir, which, I certainly followed. And it was very profound having known him personally. And he, from many of you know, I went back to Brookline and I wanted to study Talmud before you could really study Talmud as an Orthodox community. And he gave me he told me I should go to the seminary and learn Talmud. And, I want to learn Talmud, and I had Korean Jewish education, so forth. And then to be in the class and to follow the class. And I could barely follow the class because he always went very fast at Ashkenaz. And it was such a profound experience. And I was obviously the only woman. I used to be afraid when I would come in late because I was obvious. And I, because I really liked the rabbi, I always wanted to sit next to him. And so I did. And I remember one time, this was in the Talmud class, he liked to show off the class. Some of the people would double. He liked to show off the class. He would get like a Haredi rabbi he knew, or if they had a guest from Israel. And one time he came up to me and said, Ellen, it's not me, but, I don't want to insult the guest. Maybe you could sit someplace, I'm okay with you sitting next to me, but maybe you should sit someplace else. And they said, no. I'm not going to have to get you to move. The guest can sit over there. But I was so moved that I did move. And, after class, we would all sit and talk. And then one time he said, they really can start davening with me here. And I looked at, oh no, you mean they can't start davening with me here? So he was always very sensitive. And what he taught, actually, before he taught the leading rabbis, is he taught really a lot about Ben Adam L'Chavaro things and how you have to really care about people first. I remember he said something about that if you steal from somebody, it's worse than if you violate something from Hashem, because you're both violating Hashem and you're violating the person. And you can never really undo what you've really stolen from the person. You've stolen the neshama from the person. And then there was another thing he said about Rav Eli. I think it was Rav Elishav, who he had someone wrote him, he had a son who married a non-Jewish woman. And he wrote to the rabbi, Rav Elishav, I think it was Rav Elishav, maybe Rav Elishav was quoting it. He wrote and said, can I come back and visit for Pesach? And, because, my son who's married to the non-Jewish lady and he doesn't keep Shabbos, he might come in and this will be embarrassing to me. How can I do it? And Rav Elishav said, no, if your son wants to come for Pesach, you should let your son come for Pesach. And maybe he will, repent. Maybe he'll end up divorcing the woman, or she'll convert. But just the fact that he wants to come back and be at his father's table and eat his mother's food for Pesach, he should do that. And I'll say myself, experience that I had, that my parents are not Orthodox, and for a long time I did not come for Pesach. And I had a rabbi in Brooklyn who said, "Yeah, you can go home, you go for Shabbos, but not Pesach, And frequently I was privileged to spend Pesach at the Kelemers. And towards the end of my parents' life, my father was no longer cognizant enough. They were in separate rooms in the home. And I called Rabbi Kelemer and I said something like, maybe I want to go home for Pesach. And he said, but I said, well, maybe not Pesach. It's Pesach. You should come home to your mother for Pesach. And I said, what about kasher? Will you bring your food? And, you sort of cook a little bit. So he really followed it in a sense of Dam B'Chaviro and the holiness of family. It really was typified of the fact that this really transcended everything for him. And that's what he taught in the class. And just one other memory of the class is he would start the halakha class. He would start reading the Rambam. And he didn't do Svaria. I always want to think that, maybe I should teach him to do Svaria. But he would start reading the Gemara or start reading the Rambam. And it wasn't boring, but he would just be reading. He'd look at the text. And all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. But all of a sudden, he would read to the text and he'd go like Olam Haba. He would just put everything together. And he didn't even know it hit you. It was just so profound where he would go and what he would do with the texts.
No, this year's, I know we have Howard and Mark, if you want to share, but I also know, I've been talking to some over the years, younger people who've tried to give shiurim in the community, and they get very upset because people, whatever it is, people don't like going to shiurim, no matter, day, night, whatever. And if the rabbi had 3 people show up, or if he was given the Shabbos Agol Drasha to 500, he taught as if it didn't matter. And I've said to so many young guys who got upset because they say, I gave a shiur and no one comes. I say, Rabbi Kelemer gives a shiur and sometimes 3 people come, and he gives the same enthusiasm as if it's a Shabbos Agadol drasha with 500 people. And week after week, and I know Bernie said, maybe once or twice we had more than 12 people. And every week he still prepared. He still made his photocopies. He still came in and gave the shir as if the room was full. And I think it was just an amazing thing, because that attention to a single person is what everyone's been talking about over the shiva. Like, it didn't matter to him if it was one person. And I've said the story numerous times over the last few weeks. If a 4-year-old or a high school boy or Rabbi Lashav was waiting online after 9:45 Marv to ask him a question, he would answer in the order the people showed up, and he would give each one the time to ask. And I've seen him sit with my 4-year-old, my 6-year-old, my 7-year-old, the same way he would sit with someone who was, who was a gadol. So, I mean, Howard and Mark, if you want to share.
Mark, you have to unmute.
All right. I mean, I'm not sure what specifically to add. I mean, I've been coming to the Shia for several years, although until COVID locked us down, I spent more time away from West Hempstead during the last few years than here, between Israel and where else my kids have been. But I was always taken aback by the Rav, not only by the breadth of his knowledge, but as everybody knows, as has been here stated, that he's a gadol, yet he's such a warm, understanding individual who just sees everybody on the level that they're at. And some people will say that some people have criticism of people because they give a different answer to different people. But the godless of Rav Kelemer was that he knew where you were coming from. And he knew that someone could accept a more machmir answer. He would give the more machmir answer if that's what he truly believed. However, if he felt the person would not be able to accept that, then he would find a makil answer. So it's not a question of being, what's the word I'm looking for? Inconsistent. It's consistency based upon who needs the answer. The shir itself was always difficult for me to understand everything that was said. Reading along with the tiny little print, my eyes can't handle that. So I glossed over and listened to the rabbi speak much more than I read along. But I always came away each week with learning something. And sometimes it would even be, well, this is what this famous rabbi says. However, Rabbi Kelemer explained why something else could be inferred from it. Like not really wanting to contradict the gadol, but showing that, well, maybe in this type of, and a perfect example was things about COVID, about how you should be much more machmir from the science and the health than maybe from a strictly halachic perspective. And it was just, I just took something from it every single week.
Howard, do you want to chime in with anything? No?
I mean, basically, what everybody said is true. You felt like when the rabbi spoke, he was friends with the person and you became friends with the rabbi. And it was just an opportunity to really understand different perspectives. And no matter how we felt or different perspectives, you felt that the rabbi respected it and really, gained a lot out of it. So that's really was the best part for me.
And Ilan, just to jump in, I think one of the things the rabbi mentioned a bunch of times, he didn't like the biographies, like the art scroll biographies.
Yeah.
Sean, you muted yourself.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I know the rabbi would say that he didn't like the biographies from Art Scroll because it made it look like these people were, gadols from birth, where they had normal size. I remember when he talked about Rav Belsky, he talked about Rav Belsky as a good basketball player, right? Do you guys remember that year? He said Rav Belsky goes, but he was a very tall guy. He was a very good basketball player. And he wanted us to know that. And I think that's what Mark was saying too, that I remember a few times I asked him a shayla and he would say, the halacha is this. He said, but someone like you should do this. That he wanted you to know that you don't there is a halacha, and if you need to use to be makel, you could use it. But he wanted you to know you're not that person that should use not the chumrah, but he wanted you to know like not to be makel for a certain person. He wanted you to feel that you are that person. And I think like that was, what Mark was saying, that he found the way to not answer different for different people, but wanted you to know that you could go above the halacha, because not that you were that type of person. And for someone like you, he expected more. And I think there's 6,000 people in that category like us that he knew how far you could go, and he expected more from you. Is there anyone else on the share that we missed that would like to say anything?
Well, I have something at the end, but Yaakov, you want to say anything?
We also have to thank Yaakov, because Yaakov is the one who's been going into the shul every week in the rabbi's office, and putting it on Zoom. I know as the rabbi was not so proficient with Zoom, but he did tell us he got an iPhone. I remember one of the last classes, when his phone rang, he showed us all that he had an iPhone and graduated from the flip phone. But Yaakov would go into his office and Zoom the class for all of us at home, so we could listen for the last few months. And
he did say Gam Zoom Latova.
Yeah, and it was Gam Zoom Latova, a few of the shiurim.
I'd like to recall something from the recent Monday night set of series, probably within the last decade. A lot of emphasis has emerged this evening and otherwise on his relationship with the individual and his sensitivity to the personal needs of the Kehillah. But I think he also had a broad view of the historic role or halacha in the broader history of the nation. And within recent years, there's been this huge debate in Israel, a divisive issue with regard to gerus. And the tough standards, the high bar that's being set by the centralized rabbinic authority that is excluding particularly the better part of 1 million potential Jewish persons as parts of Klal Yisrael. So there was a program that's been initiated by some of the, I suppose, more modern, of rabbinic leadership in Israel, that they've constructed a program of gerus for people in the army, so that among them, of course, many of these Russian olim, who have been born in Israel or came as young persons, and now they're serving in the army, and they would like to be recognized as Jews because they certainly identify as Israelis. And they perfected this program of training for gerus during the military and as part of the military service. And it was sort of controversial. And the rabbi developed, based on the halachic precedents, a notion of Jewish identity based on a Jewish national identity. Do you recall that, Ilan?
Yes, I recall. Yes,
Mark. And his bottom line was, after several sessions, it happened to be during the period, at least part of it, while I was here in West Hempstead, and for the concluding segment of that program. And his bottom line was, there is a concept in halacha which he established for us based on the sources of a national Jewish identity, and he said nothing could be stronger, a more basic sense of Jewish identity than service in the military. And he saw this, and I think he saw this toward the end in recent years as what could be and should be encouraged as a step in the solution to the current historic challenge.
Yeah, I also want to add that, in the end, he was teaching about masks and how we have to protect ourselves and science, but I particularly like the humanistic part, but it was also very uncompromising about the halacha and what the Gedolim really said. And he dafka chose Haredi post scheme. And he really balanced that, and he really taught that. And like the rest of you, it was sometimes, I can read the source, sometimes very difficult, but he was also really showing the purity of the sources, and yet also how the rabbis related to people in everyday situations. And that was attention that I think you seldom get in, I mean, I hang out also in the conservative community and liberal community, and you don't get that there. And in most modern or in most Orthodox, you don't get the people. And he really showed, wow, the sources really, I don't know, they prescribe life. They prescribe for working with a congregation and for the life that we're living. And that I think was really rare with Rabbi Kelemer.
Yeah,
Speaking of
Ellen, I
which,
agree with you. Yeah.
Speaking of which, I know that he accorded Cantor Todd Rosner of who was a from guy, but he's the cantor of the JCC, whatever it's called now. He always gave him kavod when he came to the Young Israel, which was very often, I think weekly. And I know that he always treated my brother with the greatest of respect. This goes back 20 years ago, right before my father passed away. Rabbi Kelemer went over, this was only like 5 miles from here, went over to my father's house and had a long conversation, over an hour. And I asked him afterwards about what they discussed. And my father wouldn't say much, and the rabbi wouldn't say much. And then shortly thereafter was my son's bar mitzvah. And Rav Kelemer mentioned that he had met with my father just about a year or so before that, before he was nifter. And something came out about how, you know what, I'm an Orthodox, you're an Orthodox rabbi, I'm a conservative Jew. There's really not much difference between us. And Rabbi Kelemer said, that's true. Something like that. So to be at home with the Hasidic community and to speak their language and to be so respected by them, yet at the same time to have this perspective of giving proper kavod to Jews of all different denominations is just something that is extremely rare. And I don't know anybody who can do this besides Rav Kelemer Hatzel.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have Yaakov. You want to say anything else, or?
I think, yeah. First of all, Yashkach for setting this up, and Sean also, and yeah, I mean, like was said, there's so many. Obviously, go through all the different shuvas that we went through. Rav Moshe, Rav Ovadia, and his breadth of knowledge is unbelievable, and his respect for every gadol and every person, every person's opinion, and to make everyone feel welcome. There's so many. I got the opportunity to spend a lot of time with him during this year, also before this year. He would come about 2 hours early, usually at 7 o'clock. Already start trying to make photocopies, photostats, you would call it. And a lot of times the machine wouldn't work, and he'd still always try, but there was always there's like 12 copies of one sheet and 8 copies of another. Try to make another copy, but he really wanted every person to be able to have the source sheet and be able to look inside. And even if someone came late, he would try to make sure they had a copy of it, or they could look on with him, or he'd open up the original sefer, and that everyone would be able to benefit from the shir, the best way possible. Really for a long time, obviously during COVID, a lot of times it was just me or sometimes a couple other people. So usually we were okay with the copies. I would just make a copy of it and send out the email with the copy. But yeah, it's really there's so many different interactions. Just very quickly, there's a pasuk that I just thought it came to mind. There's a pasuk that says a couple parshas ago, it says that his sister said to Paro's daughter, "Shall I go and summon for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women who will nurse the boy of you?" The Rashi quotes the Gemara Sota that says that when Paro's daughter tried to get various Egyptian women to nurse the 3-month Moshe, he refused to nurse. And the reason was because Hashem said, "Is it proper that the mouth that will speak to the Shekhinah will be sullied with unclean milk? Shall the Egyptian woman later be able to say, I fed the mouth that conversed with the Shekhinah?" So Rav Pam brings down on this that he says that a machanech is compared to a nursing woman based on Rashi and Shir Hashirim. He says that just as a nursing woman gives of herself to feed and strengthen a young child, so does a machanech give of his or her very essence to transmit Torah and Yiras Shamayim to hungry students, which is everyone really on the Zoom right now. And Rav Pam would often repeat a remark that a machanech once said that brought him great joy. He said that this week we have a midwinter break, and I feel like a nursing woman whose baby has been taken away for a week's time, and she has a tremendous need and desire to nurse. I feel the same about transmitting Hashem's Torah to my Talmidim, and I'm sure Rabbi Kelemer from Shemayim feels this way right now. And he concludes by saying that being a mechanech is not merely a job, which we all know. Rabbi Kelemer definitely didn't do it just a 9-to-5 job. He really did it like 24/7. He says it's a sacred calling which the true devoted educator simply cannot tear himself away from. And he concludes by saying, fortunate is the student who has such a Rebbe or Mora. And we were definitely very fortunate.
All right, does anybody else have anything? Because I'm going to go last in that I have something chronologically speaking, which I think is last of all the things we have. Anybody want to say anything?
Elon, if any of the kids want to we want to thank all the children that did join. And if any of you guys want to say anything, I know you guys have heard a ton over the Shiva. And like we said at the beginning, all the stories don't surprise you. And I know, Elon, there was Yaakov, the last few, I think there was one class we did in the base medrash after COVID. That was like
Sean, we lost you again. You have to unmute.
There were a few classes that we had.
Yeah.
In where he tried to do it in the base medrash. He went into the office, but he tried to do it in the base medrash, and we tried to actually have people come.
Yeah, I was there for at least 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was there for 4.
I think it was one of the last ones. Someone walked in at 9:40 for Mariv, but they canceled the 9:45 Mariv after COVID, if you remember. And Rabbi Kelemer, there were like 3 of us left, and the guy said he needed to say Kaddish, and there was only 3 people in the whole shul. And the rabbi said to him, who do you need to say Kaddish for? And he said, my son, who passed away a few years ago. And it was an older man. And Rabbi Kelemer said to him, come, I'm a member of that same club. Come, we'll sit and talk. And then he said, right now, I can't find a Mariv. But he goes, I'm going to Brooklyn soon. And I know one shul has late Marivs. Write your son's name down, and I'll say Kaddish tonight for him. But tomorrow morning, there's a 6 o'clock, a 7 o'clock, and 8 o'clock. So you could say Kaddish at Shachris, but I'm going to Brooklyn now. So you'll give me the name and I'll do it for you. And that was one of the last Yom that in person that I walked out. That was the story I remember walking out to.
Amazing. He never wanted anyone to have to wait the 9:45 Mars. Okay, start without me. It's okay. And he'd go back to his office, get his hat.
All right, so
Elon, before any of the kids want to say anything before Elon finishes the evening.
You have to unmute yourself if no one wants to say anything. Okay, so I'll just share something.
Before you start, I want to thank the kids for joining. I know that I told Javi and Andrew, and I don't know if they told them or other people told the others, but there's a lot that on a personal, there's a lot that we can thank everybody, the Kelemers for, and on a class level, there's a lot. So I'm glad that you joined in to hear our comments.
Yeah, thank you all for appreciating him and who he was and his brilliance. And, you could have a gem, but people need to appreciate it. And you guys did. So that's very meaningful.
Thank you for sharing it.
Yes. And thank you all for coming on. It's wonderful to have, members of the family here. So I'm going to share now a story, which I'm pretty sure I've been the only person to have this honor. Back around Pesach time, we had an open forum, and there was a need for a lot of questions from the community to be answered. And so Rabbi Kelemer asked me, at the time I was starting to develop my expertise in Zoom, and he asked me if I could set up a Zoom for the community at the time for people to come on. And I happen to be pretty lucky, because if you know the way Zoom works, at the base level account, until you move up to an enterprise level, you get 100 users. And on this particular Monday, I think it was a Monday night forum that we had it, but it was very similar to this environment over here. But instead of having 17 people, we had 94. And my heart was in my throat for a little bit, because if people ended up getting to 100, I was going to exceed it. But Baruch Hashem had held at 94, and that was the most that we had. But while this was going on, I was amazed first at how strictly the Rav followed the protocols at the time. He came with a mask. He asked me what he wanted done. He sat in the very seat that I'm sitting in right now, and he conducted the Zoom with the very virtual background that I have of the English drill set behind. But throughout this entire time, most people don't know, we were actually working as a team. My wife is sitting near the other computer that I have. And while Rabbi Kelemer Zatzal was logged on to my connection, which I have over here, I was actually logged on without a video to a separate connection to get all the chat questions that were coming on at the same time. And then I was feeding him the chat questions and he was fielding them from where I was over here. So we were working as a beautiful dynamic Zoom team, which I've done later on with a bunch of people as part of CLE, continuing legal education seminars, but nothing like that. And it was a unique experience and something that I'm never going to forget. And my wife is never going to forget either. It was such an honor to have him. And this was in March, of this year. And I don't think, as far as my recollection, obviously the Rav Zatzal was on many other Zooms, but I don't think he was on a Zoom that had that many people, that many questions flying. While we were in the midst of dealing with the questions, he was always a person who believed in Shoel Kenyanu Meishiv Kahalacha, that you always dealt with this. We said before, people would come to him in line. You had to have your place in line. There was never any skipping of it, which was great. It was a wonderful mila of the Rav, so that you knew where you were going to be. You would wait, and then unless there was something super pressing, which happened once or twice, but other than that, it was great that he dealt with everybody just as they came in and dealt with it equally. There was a person, though, in the midst of that shiur who asked about a ruling that the Rav had made with respect to Yukum Purkan. And there was a discussion over the fact that the Rav had put out in his guidelines for davening at home. And this was, again, right at the start of the pandemic. So there was nobody coming to shul after March 13th. And this was around March 20th. And you're going to see in a second how I know that it was the date. And the Rav's ruling was that you don't say any of the Yukum Purkan paragraphs. Now, one thing that the Rav was also very big on was minhag, and following a Masorah of a person's family. It has always been my minhag to follow what the art scroll said, which is the old art scroll. Now, there are two versions of the art scroll. There's the art scroll English, the RCA version, and then there's now the Yitzchak Yair, which is the Hebrew version. And there was a fundamental shift between the two of them. But when I was growing up, I remember from the art scroll, a person who's praying at home or as an individual praying should only say, the first paragraph of Yukum Purkan and should not say the second Yukum Purkan nor the Misha Berach that follows afterwards. Now, in and of itself, if you look at the prayers, that makes sense because the second Yukum Purkan is designed for a Kahal, a congregation, and the Misha Berach is specifically also designed for a Kahal, a congregation. So I always grew up saying that you should say the first Yukum Purkan. But then a bunch of people, had this question, and I had it also. Why is it that the ruling of the Rav was that the shul should not be saying, the members of the shul should not be saying any of the Yukum Purkans? And so, as I said before, it was Shoel Kinyan Meishiv Chalacha. There were all these Pesach questions flying. Then in the midst of this all, the Rav gets this question, and he said, it's not for now, but we'll table it and we'll deal with it another time. So happens, and this is the epilogue, everybody who came on now gets to see this, which very few people have, and I'm going to put it up. So happens that we had discussed this issue at, another person came on. Okay, hopefully we have a new person came on. And you can see now from my screen that we had, let me just make sure there's nobody who else needs to, okay, good. We have everybody who's wanted to come on. And you can see that I wrote him a message along with Rabbi Galler. So Rabbi Galler was the only other person who saw this regarding Yukum Purkan, and it was specifically brought down by Ms. Hannah Farkas down from the OU that in this case, let me just make my, there we go, screen smaller. You'll see over here the discussion, and she says specifically, Yukum Purkan is a 2-paragraph Aramaic tefillah, and she describes how the first paragraph is written in the third person for all of the world's Torah leaders. And because of the grammar, she said basically what was in the art scroll before. Since the latter 2 paragraphs refer specifically to the local congregation and speak directly to them, if for whatever reason a Jew is unable to pray in the synagogue on Shabbat morning, he or she should omit the second Yukum Purkan and the Misha Berach. And that seemed to be the ruling from the OU, and yet you had Rav Kelemer giving a different ruling. So it turns out that he said, look into the Mishnah Brura, and you'll see why. The shul follows the Mishnah Brura, and this is our Masorah, this is our minhag, and we're not going to deviate from it. What you wrote over here in terms of the Devar Torah is beautiful, and I agree with everything about it, especially this part down here regarding the idea of being alone. I thought this really struck me in the light of the pandemic. Finally, Ms. Farkas wrote, finally, it seems to me that after the chanting of the Torah and the chanting of the Haftarah, one could come to feel, God forbid, disconnected and alone. She obviously didn't write this during the COVID era, but of course, at the time, it was even all the more apropos. People were feeling disconnected and alone. And then she further writes, we no longer have our teacher Moshe to teach us at Mount Sinai. We no longer have Yeshayahu, Yechezkel, and Yirmiyahu to share their prophecies they did in yesteryear. So how are we to live fulfilling and relevant Torah lives to fulfill the will of Hashem? Only through the vision and teachings of the national and local leadership of Klal Yisrael, with the support of the Parnasim who provide programs. And this is why over here we recite Yikum Borkan, but in addition to that, people who are feeling alone should also be reciting it. So I posed this question to him and he said, it's a beautiful Devar Torah, but I'm telling you again right now, we follow the Mishnah Berurah, and he's very clear as to why that's the case. Nonetheless, he said, dig around, see what you can find. So I ended up doing that. And I actually have over here, and I'm going to share this also, just so you can see it. Let me share both. Give me a second. Both the Rivavot Ephraim, which he asked me to look at, as well as, there we go, I can double share now, which you should be seeing this in a second. Okay, and you'll see, for those who are interested, I could send this to you afterwards if you want. There's an entire question as to whether or not Yikum Borkan should be said as a Yachid. All right, or not. And the Rivavot Ephraim here goes through an entire discussion. It's very lengthy, but I'm going to show you the one part which is really spoke to me in this whole thing. Apparently, he found a Sharei Ephraim which holds exactly like the Art Scroll did. So you have the Sharei Ephraim versus the Mishnah Berurah. And the main understanding of that entire piece, it's getting late, so I'm not going to go through it all. But the main understanding is that we have a general prohibition about saying prayers, saying tefillot in Aramaic, because ultimately the Malachei Hasharet, the angels who are responsible for administering the prayers, they don't understand Aramaic. So as a result, if a person says a tefillah in Aramaic, it's actually prohibited according to the ruling of the Maran of the Shulchan Aruch, and then afterwards the Mechaber, and then afterwards the Mishnah Berurah comments upon that, and he says this is the reason why we don't say Yikum Borkan at all, and he's very specific about saying that. There's no question. On the other hand, though, after an exhaustive analysis from the Rivavot Ephraim, you'll see that at the end, I have this excerpt that's over here. Tshuvat Rav Hai Gaon, Tshuvat HaGaonim, Hotzaat me Kirya Nemana, Siman Shimayon Gimel Cholik. And it seems to be there's a response going back from Rav Hai Gaon, going all the way back to the time of the Gaonim. So this predates the Shulchan Aruch. And he says, so he says that no, Yikum Borkan is not a prayer as we understand it. Rather, it's a bracha, it's a blessing. The Lova Torah Tefillah, and it's not exactly what I just said. It's not in the Torah Tefillah. It's not in the understanding of prayer, but the Latet Bracha, Lova Inin Davka Shechina Ad Kad Lashono. But rather to give a bracha over, to convey a blessing, this does not require the presence of the Shechina, the divine manifestation of God, which you need in a congregation, and that's why it says it. Now, by the way, for those people who really want to get into this, the Sharei Ephraim later says that perhaps you could say it be a chidut, but only a person who happens to be in the same building where there's a congregation. So that could be a possible gloss on the Sharei Ephraim. But for those people who want to adopt the traditional view that the Art Scroll originally does, and then I'm going to tell you what it says now in the Yitzchak Yair. The Sharei Ephraim says that you can say, therefore, the first paragraph, because of the idea that, and the people who defend him say that because it's the idea of a bracha. Mishnah Berurah obviously doesn't follow that because he views it as being a tefillah. And in truth, if you look at Yikum Borkan, it has elements of both. All right, Malka de Alma Yevarech Yaton Yapish Chayechon. The master of the world should bless everyone and increase their livelihoods, and their lives, etc., and all manner of blessing. But at the same time, there's also aspects of the tefillah, and then of course there's the aspects of the Misha Berach down at the end. You can make the argument that if the Misha Berach is a bracha, we should be saying it as well, but for the fact that the duk there is obviously referring to a kahal, so maybe someone should play with the grammar. And that was the give and take, the shakla v'tarya. But again, he said, the shul's minhag is to always follow the Mishnah Berurah, and we're going to follow that. I did ask him, though, two pointed questions on this. First of all was the obvious one, that if we have a tshuva of Rav Hai Gaon that goes back, and assuming that it's authentic, shouldn't we be carrying more weight against this? And the other question that I asked him was that if we're going to be saying that this is a tefillah, not a tefillah, but it's actually something of a bracha, then it would certainly be the case, if you take a look at it, that it's paired up with the other brachot that you have over there. And the only reason why we're not having the other brachot is because the other brachot are specifically for a congregation. They're not for a yachid, and therefore you wouldn't be saying that. So I also at the end wrote over here, the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah's position leads to a historical paradox of sort, assuming you buy into the bracha theory, which is that if a person who was in Bavel, the Iraq region where Aramaic was spoken at the time of the Gaonim, and he wished to give a bracha to his or her child, according to this, because Yikum Porkan would be on the Torah of the bracha, he or she wouldn't be allowed to, because it would be a bracha of Aramaic, and you're not allowed to ask for your own needs or deal with your own needs in Aramaic. But if there was another parent at the same time living in Arabia who spoke Arabic as opposed to Aramaic, that would be allowed, because you are allowed to give a bracha in English, you're allowed to give a bracha in Arabic and other foreign languages as well. So I wrote at the end, Tarta Desatra, if he asked me, which is perhaps why the latest version of the Art Scroll Hebrew Siddur equivocates. And by what I mean that is that if you take a look at the Yitzchak Agir, you'll now see that they have one side that says, the Sharei Ephraim says that you can say Yikum Porkan with only the first paragraph, and it says the Mishnah Berurah says you don't say it, and it doesn't decide one way or another. So to answer the question, since I never liked leaving something resolved, the Rav, never got, he was so inundated with other questions for Pesach that I'm sure in March of 2020, and then we had, unfortunately, the really bad period in April that came after that, there was a bunch of things. So, but I would like to suggest a further defense for the Mishnah Berurah and the position of not saying Yikum Porkan, notwithstanding the fact that I personally still have been saying it because that's my Masorah in the family. But for the shul and for the Rav's ruling, we could also make an argument that even if it is a bracha, right, even if it is an aspect of a blessing, you never want to take a chance. And this was something which the Rav showed when there's his ultimate respect and humility and solicitousness to everyone. He was always so caring of everyone. You never want to take a chance that a bracha would go unanswered. So in this particular case, because there's a slight possibility that a bracha in Aramaic wouldn't be as effective as a bracha given in Hebrew or a bracha given in English or any other language, just based upon that safek alone, and being so caring for any other of the people, especially when it comes to Klal Yisrael and the national leaders, which is what the first Yikum Porkan talks about, the Reishei Galvata, Reishei Mitivata, all of the leaders of the yeshivot. You would never want to even take a chance at that time of the bracha not being in place, and that's the reason why we don't say it. Instead, we end up reserving the bracha in this particular case only for when there's a kahal, only when there's the power of the tzibur, the power of the community together, because we don't want to take a chance even of that not hitting home. And there, in truth, are many other prayers that we do say for saying Yikum Porkan. Historical note, by the way, Yikum Porkan actually was one of the first prayers that came under attack from the Reform movement in the 1800s on grounds that the prayer was out of date and had no place in the liturgy. So it happens that no matter which side you follow, whether the Sharei Ephraim or the Mishnah Berurah, they both are vehemently opposed to that view. And there's a tremendous importance, if you take a look at that entire analysis in the Revivot Ephraim, of the beauty of Yikum Porkan and the way that it's said. So in this particular case, we say that the Rab should be a meliz Yosher for all of us, in where we are right now. And the last issue that I dealt with, ironically, was about Porkan, about salvation. So may he do his part in bringing us salvation in all manner of bracha. And as we say on Shabbat, Yikum Porkan min Shemaya, may ultimately Hashem bless us and our entire community.
Amen. Yashkach.
That was beautiful, Elon. Thank you.
All right, so I think that's it. Does anybody want to say anything else? No? All right, so we're at 10 o'clock. So what I'll do, just so everybody wants to know, with the recording, I'll get the recording off my cloud account in about, let's say 20, 30 minutes, whenever it's done, and I'll post it on YouTube, and then I'll send a link out to Yaakov and to Sean, and the rest of you guys. You'll be able to see the video. And with that, I want to thank everybody for coming. And Sean, thank you so much for putting this all together. And Yaakov, thank you also for feeding me the source sheets over the years. And let's hope that we all have a rest of as best of a year as possible. And for the family,
Amen.
Amen.
And thank you.
Amen.
Amazing. Thank you guys all for coming. And I know we said, I think Monday night, well, he gave the class Monday night, the night before he went into the hospital. And that was, obviously the last time most of us spoke to him. I know today I went out and bought a Rabbi Elyashiv biography, and I told my wife I'm going to try to read it every Monday night from 9 to 9:45 till I finish it. And then I'll hopefully figure out something in a few months when that's done.
Yeah.
But thank you guys all.
Beautiful.
We must live, yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. And don't forget, everybody, there's Rabbi Galler's Learning Initiative as well. If you haven't signed up for, we're trying to complete Shas in time for the Shloshim. So if you want to get involved with that, we already have, it looks like there's a significant number of Masechtot that have already been taken. But,
Yeah, I'm talking about the Zara, yeah.
Yeah. But there's still plenty of openings from what I understand left.
Okay,
So
yeah.
you can
So
certainly
that's
get
the thing.
onto
My husband and my son, they had signed up at the Shiva house. So that's part of the same thing, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
There was a separate one for Mishnayot that was going around that I signed up for. A lot of people signed up for.
Right. So
House,
just to be clear, this is not Mishnayot. This is Talmud Bavli. So it's Gemara.
Right, yeah, I know. There was separately a Mishnayot one.
Okay. All right. So good. Baruch Hashem. We're doing Shas one way or another. Excellent.
Okay, amazing. Also, I don't know, would anyone be interested in having like a WhatsApp group on the biography of Rav Elyashiv? Like every Monday, someone could post something.
I'm not on WhatsApp, unfortunately. So
Oh, all right. So do you want to do it by email?
Ronit?
Yeah.
Who's Ronit?
Bluestein.
Yeah, Yaakov's mom.
maybe we'll discuss it later.
Yeah, we can
It
discuss
is
later.
getting late, so I just want to get going. But anyway,
yeah,
everybody
you.
have a great night, and all should be
too.
well. And thank you so much for coming.
Amen. Yeah,
Ron,
thank you,
regards to
Elon.
Bora.
Only good things, yeah.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah,
Take care,
thank you,
everyone.
Elon. And also thank you all the times. I know, when you would put the sheets up and do the sharing, you were always helping everybody follow along and highlighting, and you always do an excellent job. Thank you so much, Ka.
You're very welcome. All right. Take care. Good night.